welcome to the Motivational Millennial Podcast, where we talk with inspiring members of the millennial generation who are living life with a sense of purpose and achieving their dreams. I'm Ivy LeClaire.
And I'm Blake Brandis.
Our Motivational Millennial guest today is Nti-Asare. Anna is a writer, college lecturer, and soon-to-be PhD student. She graduated from the University of Cambridge with her master's in multidisciplinary gender studies, and from Stanford University with her bachelor's in medical anthropology. Anna is deeply interested in gender and race issues in the U.S., especially as these relate to youth education and popular culture. She will be pursuing her PhD in education at the University of Cambridge as a Gates Scholar starting in the fall of 2017. Her opinion pieces have been published by the Huffington Post and For Harriet. Anna, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited.
We're so glad to have you. Will you share a little bit more about what you're up to at the moment and what you love about it?
Definitely. So I've spent the past 2 years in between getting my master's and starting my PhD in the fall teaching at a low-income public high school in Stockton, California. And that's really what got me super interested in education and just gave me a better understanding of why it's so important that we focus on education. And having that happen around the same time as our most recent election and spending time with my kids who, like I said, are low income, are majority students of color, it's just really clear that our country really needs to focus on how we're teaching each other about each other and what we're teaching and what we're saying is important and what isn't in our books and in our schools. So that's what I do right now. And I'm really excited to continue my own research, get back to my books and my reading. I'm really a very proud and big nerd. And so I'm excited, very excited to get back to that and not really have my lesson plans that I have to take care of while still being involved with my students in a new way, because I'm going to be counseling our graduates on how they might be able to succeed in college, but also if they didn't end up getting into the school they wanted to go to and they're perhaps maybe not going to school or a community college, I can help them transfer or get to where they want to be and maybe just not as quickly as they thought they could do it, but giving them some other options to do it. So I'm excited.
What kind of guidance would you typically give some of those students? Because that's a very formative age, and I'd imagine the kind of things you would share with them would definitely be impactful for their way they think about themselves and their journey.
Yeah, definitely. I think, well, on one hand, just being present as a young woman of color for my students is something that really, I hope, inspires them, but at least has an impact in the way they think of what's possible for them and for themselves. And so I always just share my own, personal story, even though it's a lot different than a lot of my students. It still helps them to see that there's so many possibilities in the world for them, no matter their gender, no matter their skin color, no matter their income. So that's one thing that I talk about quite often, that they can be the ones that have the agency in choosing how their life is going to work out. And of course, that's a lot easier with certain privileges. But even if you don't have those privileges, it doesn't mean that anyone can steal that from you. And so my main real lesson that I teach them is that they can make those changes. They can do what they want to do. It may be harder for some of us, but in the end, it really just depends on us.
That's such an important perspective to have because it's really empowering. There's an element that's like, oh my gosh, there's a lot of pressure then on me, but really I have the ability. It's really an empowering perspective to have.
Definitely. Because I don't want them to feel like they've done something wrong if, they don't get into a four-year university right away, or if they go down a different path. That's definitely not the message that I want them to take from it, but more so, okay, but I can always make the decision to follow my dreams and do what I want to do and be in charge. So hopefully they are taking it with that empowering mindset.
You mentioned that you share some of your personal journey with them. I'm wondering what elements of your personal journey do you feel resonate the most with the students?
Yeah, I would say, so students oftentimes just want to have teachers and adults in their lives who are going to be honest with them, who are going to, tell them the full truth that really matters to them. They often tell me that, you always tell us the truth. That's why we love you. And I'm like, okay, I don't know which teachers are lying to you, so I don't think anyone's lying. It's just that they feel that if you sort of can share even the struggles you've been through or things you've experienced in your past or times when things weren't going so perfectly for you, they really appreciate that and they feel they can open up and they can also trust you. And learning has such a huge it relies so heavily, I should say, on trust and that bond between the teacher and the student. And so things that I've shared with them, when I was in high school, I had my own issues with my own self-esteem and my body image, which caused an eating disorder when I was younger. And I share that, with my 8th grade health students. And so all the girls who see me as a role model for themselves can see that I didn't always feel this confident. I didn't always see myself very clearly. And so it's something that I can help them hopefully have someone that they can go to, but also know that they're not alone in going through one of those struggles. I tell them about all the times when I didn't get what I wanted. I think for my students to see my resume and, the bio that you read, they can start to feel a little intimidated sometimes. But when I step back and say, actually, I tried multiple times for some things that I didn't get the first time, the second time, the third time, I had to keep trying until I got it. And your resume and your kind of those bullet points of the highlights of your career thus far are not representative of the struggles that went into it, the effort that went into that. And they love hearing about that. So I try to be as open as possible and as open as I can be with them.
That's really powerful. And speaking of your resilience, congratulations on your Gates scholarship.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And would you mind just sharing a little bit about that process? Because you definitely showed some resilience in that experience as well.
Definitely. So my senior year in undergrad, I knew I wanted to get my PhD. I've known for a really long time that I wanted to be a public intellectual, someone who not only did well academically, but used their kind of academic excellence to do good for other people and to get more people involved in these conversations. I applied for my PhD my senior year in college, but I didn't get into any PhD programs. And it was really shocking for me because I'd always done, well in school. I had always worked really hard. I had done my research. I had all these fellowships. And I was just shocked that I didn't get in when so many people were telling me, oh, you're going to have an easy time doing this. You're not going to have any problems with this. And when it didn't work out, it just really, it's silly, but it really made me question myself, which now I'm like, an application should never make you question yourself. It should only make you believe in yourself even more and just know that it's just going to be a little longer till you get what you want. But I felt really distraught. But I did get into my master's program for Cambridge and I got a different scholarship. So at that point I had applied for the Gates. I made it to the final round and then didn't get the scholarship in the end. And so I had to apply for 2 or 3 other scholarships before I finally got one that went through. That was an exhausting experience, but it really taught me a lot about my motivations and my desire to continue to do this and to study it, especially gender and race, and pursue that even when it didn't seem that everyone wanted to support me in that, if that makes sense. And then I applied another time while I was in my master's program, and I got into the Cambridge program that I'm going to be going to, but I didn't, again, get into the American programs, which was really confusing for me. And then the year after that, it happened again. And so I realized that it really had nothing to do with necessarily my worth or my work's worth, but had to do with where in life I was supposed to be and when. And if I had gotten into those programs, I wouldn't have taught for 2 years. I wouldn't have spent time in Stockton. I wouldn't have really found what I was most passionate about, which was education and is education through various different forms, especially education that deals with youth and with popular culture and with race and with gender. So this time I applied, and before I did my interview for the Gates, I just had to look at myself in the mirror. It was one of those sort of corny moments where I had to just talk myself up and remind myself that I was worth this and I could do this and I deserved this, and that I would be really grateful if it happened. And I went into that interview probably in the most confident way I ever have and came out successful this time. So I'm really excited about it. It's been a long, long, long journey, it feels like. So I'm happy it finally came through.
Yeah, I really want to acknowledge you for that because, at any point in there, you could have just said, okay, well, this must not be for me. This must not be my path. Right. Entirely, and just completely changed directions or given up. And so the fact that you just continue, that you allowed yourself to grow from that you allowed yourself to build resilience from that is really inspiring.
Thank you. I definitely think it's something that we all should share more often, the times when we didn't get what we wanted, because, especially on a podcast like this where you have such motivational people who are accomplishing great things, who are deep thinkers. Everyone often looks at these kinds of people as if things sort of come easily to us, or that we didn't really have to work all that hard for it, or it just was a natural thing. But I think most people have these stories of, well, no, that actually didn't happen for me. And a lot of us feel quite embarrassed to admit that. And I think especially with, having gone to Stanford and gone to Cambridge, these circles of sort of quote unquote perfection, I guess, it's really difficult for people to admit. And so I always find that when I just tell people, even though it was really hard for me at first, it's helpful for everyone when I'm like, yeah, no, I just didn't get this. And then I usually hear stories of them not getting something they wanted, or how they learned from their times of what they at one time perceived as failure. So yeah, I'm trying to be better about sharing it and not feeling embarrassed, and instead feeling proud that I kept going.
I mean, I think it's amazing because it highlights what you said earlier about how sharing your story builds trust. I love that lens that vulnerability builds trust in other people. Mm-hmm. And it's so true how we can, I mean, I like all the framework that you said too about looking at someone's resume and then just kind of distilling them to those few bullet points as if they just walked in and just like got each of those
right.
things. And, the more that you share the richness of your journey, it creates a richness of you and of humanity and of other people. And they can kind of see within themselves that, it's a normal part of the process.
Definitely. Yeah, I completely agree.
And I'm interested with your work on gender and race issues. How do you see these narratives of self-worth, especially among young people, playing into the intersection of gender and race?
That's a good question. Well, I should say, so with my master's thesis, I wrote on the ways we can use Black feminism within education to respond to needs for culturally relevant pedagogy. And so a lot of my professors at the time asked me if I thought that maybe this material, books by Bell Hooks and by Audre Lorde and several other Black feminists, if that material was maybe a little too mature for a group of high school students to learn about. What I responded with was, our students are the ones that are really at the forefront of this kind of national battle around race and gender and around this attack on identity and expression. They are the ones that are, I would argue, most vulnerable to these influences of social media. And there's so many great things that come with social media. I'm obviously a really big fan, but I think that at the same time, we don't often consider how our youth are dealing with those things and how that makes them question themselves and their identity, or even being able to see these videos of African Americans and any other, group of minorities being persecuted, or, just it being so obvious that they really aren't safe, and things that they've maybe heard from childhood that they are safe and that everyone's equal, et cetera, are just really not true. And I would say it's in those teenage years when they're finally starting to really see that and see that for what it is. And so it's a constant conversation with my students when anything happens nationally concerning race, gender, and all these other intersections, how that affects them personally and how it's going to affect how they see their own identity. So there's so many different ways I could answer that, but I would say that it just is such a crucial conversation to have with youth. Another time where it's important to be honest with them, because we're not protecting them by not having conversations and serious conversations around the state of our country when it comes to these kinds of categories of race, gender, ethnicity, sex, etc.
How have you felt your own intersectionality has shaped your life?
Wow. I mean, it is my life, I guess. Intersectionality. That's a hard one to answer because the intersections of our identity are what dictate our life.
Yeah, and I think it's so powerful that you are sharing, bell hooks and Audre Lorde with high school students, because some of the most challenging pedagogy is some of the realest, and those are conversations that can be really uncomfortable to have. And I think it's probably all the more reason why sharing them in a educational setting is so important. And I'm wondering, during your Gates application process, were you challenged? I mean, you mentioned sort of you were challenged on just the idea of teaching them in the first place, but did you find any resistance? I mean, Cambridge, is cutting edge in a lot of ways, but in some ways is still highly traditional.
Right.
So what was that experience like for you?
Yeah, I've been really lucky to have an incredible advisor. In Cambridge, they would call that our supervisor. Arathi Sriprakash, and she does work within race and ethnicity and how that intersects with education and how we teach our students. And so when I was getting my master's, I was able to meet with her in person, and she was just so excited about my Black feminist lens and what I was interested in doing. And she just thought it was so crucial that young students get these kinds of lessons. And so that really actually made it a lot less challenging because she was vouching for me from the inside and just making sure that I kind of had an easier path, I guess. But it's easier to sort of approach it from a theoretical space than from a space of like feelings when dealing with an application committee, because they do still really seriously just want to see, the numbers and the qualitative research around it. When you present a question in that very academic way and show that there's a gap in the research and that there needs to be a voice who's going to respond to these things, then they're more likely to see it for what it is versus feeling that it's too controversial or maybe too touchy, etc. So in a similar way to what I did when I had presented my idea to teach students and they were concerned about their youth, I just presented it with the facts and with the data and all this research that shows us that showing students reality is what we're supposed to be doing, no matter if we think it's a little too much at that point. If they're dealing with it already, then they deserve the tools to deal with it, if that makes sense. So yeah, I just approached it from that angle. And luckily there's so many incredible tools, Black feminist tools and books and authors and theorists. So I had a lot to go off of. So that wasn't too difficult.
You mentioned that you've known for a long time that you wanted to get a PhD. Mm-hmm. What does having a PhD mean to you?
That's a great question. I think several different things. One is that for so long in our country, it was illegal for Black people to learn or to read or write. Even when it became legal, obviously we all know the history of the restrictions and the extreme injustices that were involved in that. And getting a PhD as a woman of color and to hopefully do so at a young age, a part of it is just a very simple statement that we can do this and I can do whatever I want to do despite any of these past limitations that have been placed on my community and on my people. Secondly, having a PhD allows me to be seen as sort of a quote unquote expert in my field. And as much as I can speak about these things without the PhD, I definitely can do that. And I think people do, I guess, listen to me. There's a very different respect that comes with having that degree and having that title. And because I want to be a public intellectual and be able to speak about issues that come up, whether that's on, CNN or on a random show or maybe starting my own talk show, it makes a big difference in credibility. And as a Black woman, I can't tell you how often my intellect is questioned or people try to bring me down. And as soon as I say something like, yeah, but I went to Stanford and I went to Cambridge, for some reason that changes. And while I don't agree with people's reasons for respecting titles more than maybe experience, the reality is that our world does operate that way. I don't want to give anybody any other excuses to question my ability to make the statements that I'm making.
That's really powerful. And I'm curious, when in your life would you say you developed that confidence? Because you mentioned having the struggles in adolescence. And was that more of a process for you, or was there a specific time period that really helped you develop that confidence?
Yeah, I would say that I haven't always been confident. I've always had the feeling of, importance of, I guess, social justice, but that seems so broad. But in the sense of, I've always felt this conviction that everybody, should be able to live the way they want to live and love who they want to love. I spent my life traveling from different countries to other countries with my parents and my family. My parents did international law. And so I lived in Dubai for 4 years, in Mexico for 4 years, and Sweden and Azerbaijan and all these random places growing up that sort of taught me that everyone is just really universally trying to live their best lives and they're trying to be happy. And there's just such a human quality to it that there's nothing that's absolutely true and nothing that's absolutely false. It's just very much based on the narratives we tell ourselves and each other to survive and live a happy life. And so from that perspective, I've always sort of felt that drive to do something that would allow more people to see things that way in a more accepting way. where we could come closer together rather than move further apart from each other. But in terms of the confidence to speak about it and to feel that I could be the one to speak about it, that really developed in undergrad when I went to Stanford. And I would say that that space is what allowed it to happen because of how strong the communities of color are at Stanford. There's such a rich history of resistance there, a rich history of inclusion, of really trying to continue to push towards as close as we can get to equity and acceptance. And of course, Stanford is still far off from that. There's so much work that needs to be done. But I was really lucky to have the people around me that could help kind of foster this inner voice that I always sort of had. And I had these thoughts and I had these opinions, but that allowed me to feel like I could speak them and I could be the person, maybe not at the forefront, but alongside those at the forefront, and to stand there with them and be a leader in my own right.
Well, we are certainly grateful for your leadership that you've already done and are excited for the leadership that you have ahead. As you are thinking about some of the work that you've done coaching young people and also just from your own experiences, what advice would you give other millennials who are on their journey toward fulfillment and success?
I would really say it goes back to believing in themselves, which sounds really corny, but in the sense, even when you feel like everyone else is challenging what you want to do. So if it feels like, the application didn't go through again, or you didn't get the funding that you needed, or it's going to be harder than you thought. If it really is your passion, it really is your dream, then you just have to keep trying. Because I know for myself, if I hadn't kept trying, I would have just spent most of my life probably just questioning what could have been. And I just can't handle that. I'm the kind of person who, if I have this vision of what is supposed to happen, even if it's a small project or a larger kind of life goal, I can't really rest until I'm working towards that. So even right now, I recently had an idea for a book that I want to write, and I couldn't rest until I started writing it. And so it's something that you just sort of have to continue to do and persist towards that goal, even through those hard times, because that really is what makes you a better whatever it is that you're trying to be. So it made me a better academic. It made me a better educator to not get the things that I originally wanted and to see a different way of getting there and a more fruitful way of getting there.
What would you say is one of the biggest challenges that you've faced along your journey, and what was it like for you to overcome that challenge?
I would say one of the biggest challenges has been, I think, probably other people's perceptions of, I guess, who they think I should be when they see me, and having to deal with those sort of assumptions around my own identity. So again, like I said before, being a young woman and a young woman of color and having sort of a higher voice and maybe being perceived as attractive, that all changes the way people think about me. And so they often are shocked that I went to Stanford, or that I'm a teacher even, or that I'm going to get my PhD. And that, for somebody who, has spent a lot of time trying to build up their own confidence, it can sometimes really make you question yourself, especially because, my partner is also, he also has this awesome path, and he's the mayor of our city. And so to be his partner in that and having to deal with those experiences again has definitely been a challenge, but I've used them as teachable moments for people. So when I have the opportunity to talk about it, I can help others challenge the way they look at women, and especially young women of color. And hopefully they will not repeat those mistakes moving forward. But it is a challenge, yeah.
Well, thank you for your strength and resilience and continuing to resist the assumptions and redefine people's expectations. That's how it happens, for better or for worse, right? It's one interaction at a time. Oh, I had this assumption about somebody, and you've totally blown that out of the water.
Right.
So, yeah, I'm sure it's very tiring, and it'd be nicer to do a more systemic solution. But thank you for the work you do on an individual level as well.
Yeah, and you've done so much incredible work to go to Stanford and go to Cambridge, and trying over and over again. that secretly I kind of hope for you that there's a little bit of satisfaction when you get to be like, oh, bam, actually, I went to blank, blank, blank. And people are like, oh, and you're like,
yeah,
that's right.
No, I do it in kind of a petty way myself.
I kind of hope that.
During my partner's campaign, it would happen all the time that someone would say something like, oh, you're just so beautiful and it's so great that he's so smart or something. Like just the weirdest things. And I'm like, okay, well, that's interesting. And I would wait until, someone interviewed me for an article or something. And then I would really just go all out and say, well, this person said this person said this. And I wouldn't give names, but I would say, when people do that, it really is just embarrassing for me. I'm embarrassed for them.
Right.
That they still have this really old school mentality. And so since then, the comments have really gone down. I think some people felt pretty caught off guard when I actually did speak about it. Because I usually don't tell them in the moment. I prefer for there to be sort of like a reveal later on where hopefully they feel very embarrassed.
and then that they're like hopefully learning and like growing from that. Hopefully. Yeah, that's awesome.
Well, that's definitely taking the high road. That's great to hear.
Yeah, I'll get back for this. Yeah, exactly.
Amazing. So, Anna, what unique challenges do you see millennials facing as a generation?
I think because we have had an incredible, I guess, how should I say this, like growth and exposure when it comes to what we can see all the time and how much we can share information and just readily know what's going on in the world. I think our generation has at times become a little numb to that out of survival. So I know even for myself, now when I see some video being shared of something awful happening, I sort of go into this automatic kind of, oh, I can't deal with this right now sort of thing, where I think it's sort of inhuman to suddenly try to turn off feelings of either sadness or just empathy for another person, even if you don't know that person. So I really think it's pushing past that numbness and really making sure that whatever it is that we've set our minds out to do, that in some way, shape, or form, we're trying to make things better for other people so that we don't really become numb, but instead we become more motivated to do what it is that we were doing originally, but that we continue to remind ourselves of why we're doing it and that thing hopefully is going to affect more than just ourselves. So instead that our survival depend more on the fact that we're already on a path to doing something good rather than just sort of ignoring something or numbing ourselves to human emotion in order to keep moving forward, if that makes sense.
Wonderful. And Anna, would you share with people where they can find out more about you and your work online?
Definitely. So I have a website. It's Honest Tea, which is a little play on words, honesty, but ANNASTEA.squarespace.com. And I'm on Facebook and I'm on Twitter, but I really don't check Twitter very much. But all that information is on my website, so they can find it there.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much again, and good luck on your journey at Cambridge. We're very excited for you and all the amazing things you'll continue to do in the world.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
For show notes and previous episodes, or to learn more about our coaching and event offerings, visit motivationalmillennial.com. That's millennial, MILLENNIAL. Keep in touch with us at facebook.com/motivationalmillennial.
We'd love to hear from you. Shoot us an email with your thoughts, comments, and suggestions at podcast@motivationalmillennial.com. And tell us who you might like to hear from, or if you think you or anyone you know would be good for the show.
Our theme music was composed and performed by our very own Blake Brandis.
The Motivational Millennial Podcast is edited by Brittany Felix. Have a great week, Motivational Millennials!